I am Russell Podgorsek, and I am lecturer in composition here at BSOM.
Well, welcome to the podcast. And
Thank
so
you.
very exciting that you have a world premiere coming this weekend. Two performances, Saturday and Sunday, of your piece here, Invisible Women. I was looking at it last night, and it seems to be a little bit almost like I don't want to say choral, but like the vocal version of almost like a vagina monologue. Was that a decent comparison?
I suppose so. I think the focus on women's experience is the obvious parallel, right? In this case, I am obviously not a woman, right? And so the interesting part of this is that I approached the group about doing a piece that had something to do with their lived experience as women. And really one of the first questions was like, well, especially for a group that wants to put forth music by women, why would I be the person to help deliver this message? And so we talked a lot about what the experience I've had and why I feel like I wanted to help here. One of the techniques of being an ally is like making a space for another person's voice to be heard. And in this case, this is a specific kind of skill that I have, and it's not, I'm not the only one, obviously, but I was the person who had the impetus to do this, and so I wanted to foreground their experience, essentially be a conduit and sort of a megaphone for what they were doing, rather than putting myself at the center of it, and so the project came about through a series of interviews I did with the group. And so the text is actually taken from what they told me over 6 hours of interviews about their experiences. And so this piece is thoroughly and 100% them. And I kind of think of myself more as like a filter or a procedure through which the message went, and that it's really them.
Yeah, so and you're talking about the group VAMP, right?
Yes.
Which is 5 women, right? And they're all vocalists, so there's no instruments at all.
Correct.
Right. And what so you interviewed them for 6 hours. Was it together or was it like individually?
Together.
Together?
So as a group. It was almost more like me sort of eavesdropping and, taking notes while they had a discussion among themselves. I mean, I had a couple of prompt questions, but it really was a free-flowing conversation between them about all kinds of experiences with, romantic partners, friends, colleagues. And so it really ran the gamut of all things that they experienced. And so it was then my task to kind of put it into a coherent structure that would really work for musical work.
Yeah, what were some biggest surprises you had from that 6-hour session?
I don't know if there were any surprises necessarily, but I think the thing that was most powerful about it was that even though there were a lot of difficult things and difficult situations and hard experiences, the overall message was love for partners, especially intimate partners, but love for everyone that they're around, and a real interest in wanting things to be better for everybody. It's like compassion was like the number one emotion that was cut through. Like, yeah, there were hard and sad parts, but there were also happy parts. But the whole thing all the way through was compassion for the people close to them.
Awesome. And it's down to 5 movements,
yes,
right? And there's 5 people in the group, right? So is there any correlation between that, or how did you narrow it down to?
Oh, that's a great question. So I went by topic essentially and tried to because the as a conversation might go, it was all over the place, and it kind of touched on this thing and went to this and this and this and came back to number 1 and then number 2. And there were a couple of things that were sort of quasi-poetic phrasings of things that I knew would be sort of cornerstones of movements.
There's lots of poetry in this.
There were a couple of things that were images that they evoked or invoked, I guess. And then I I took a little bit of literary license in putting it together and sort of dealing with the rhythm of the words, and maybe there's not a whole lot of rhyming or anything like that, but really matching words matching weights and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I'm not really a poet per se or anything like that, but, you know, I was thinking about how is this going to manifest in music as I was trying to organize it. And the fact that there are 5 women in the group and it ended up being 5 movements, I wish I could say there was a little bit more design to it, but I did think very much about how these are 5 human beings who are incredible musicians, 5 very different voices, and I wanted to write each piece in such a way that each individual voice could be celebrated, right? And so some movements have kind of a heavy emphasis on Mary's voice or Katrina's voice or whoever. And so there's a little bit of that shaping, but that can't be too literal.
Mm-hmm. And what voices are they? Like, I'm sure there's a soprano in there.
Mm-hmm.
Like what are the different?
Yeah, so Mary is a soprano. She often sings the top voice. Adrian is also a soprano, sings usually the second voice. Katrina's a dramatic soprano, and so she usually sings third. Paige is a mezzo soprano and often sings the fourth voice, and then Laura is a lower mezzo alto, so she often sings the fifth voice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's dive right into it. Let's look at it.
Great.
So the first movement is called The Little Things.
Yeah.
And so let's just so tell me a little bit about this first movement.
Okay, so The Little Things is about let me tell you about the structure real quick.
Okay.
Conceptually,
for the whole piece.
For the whole piece.
Okay,
so I wrote the inner movements first, in part because they had the most intense emotion. And I really wanted this to be an experience that drew the audience in, brought them to a place, and then let them out in a way that was not jarring. And so the first movement is a little bit more superficial.
Okay.
The second movement dives down a little deeper. The third movement is as deep as it gets. The fourth movement kind of comes out a little bit, and then the fifth movement it has a little bit of humor and also that sense of compassion and like really deep love for the people around you.
With the baby.
Yes,
yeah,
even if you're giving them a hard time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so the little things, there was a lot of mundane things that came out that maybe didn't get done around the house or whatever, that kind of thing. And so it seemed like a perfect kind of entry point because there was already a palette of things that were sort of laid out. And, I set it in such a way that it's kind of built around this blues scale so that it feels a little bit like approachable. Like it's that sassy kind of we can maybe get a little bit angry about this kind of thing,
Yeah.
And there maybe is a little bit of adult language in this one too to make that point.
Yeah,
right.
Yes, I love it. It starts out with sassy, right?
Yeah.
So and then there's a lot of talk here about when you were doing your interviews with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're talking about there's a lot of just kind of household chores, but then there's also like, I don't want to be the nag. Like, why do I have to ask? Is this piece, is it more about like just the burdens of life, or is it more about that having to engage with a partner?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the ultimate desire is, and this, transcends any person's gender identity, is that we want equal partners in our endeavors. And whether that's maintaining a household, whether it's doing something at work, whether it's doing something artistic together, right? We want a matched commitment. We want some reciprocity in what we're giving to the thing. And that not only creates the best results, right? But it also creates the best environment where everyone feels valued and feels like when it's time to overextend just a little to help the other person, it's worth it. And so I think that's really the emotional content of this movement is that, where it's like, these things have to get done, but I don't want to be the person who has to like whip you into shape, right?
Yeah.
We have to be partners.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. So is anything, so you talk about different voices, kind of like, well, so what voice kind of is featured here, or? So
in this one, actually, each voice gets a little moment. And so there's, this is one of the things. So I wrote as I said, the inner movements first, and they're much more laden with imagery and sort of deeper, darker kind of feelings. And as a consequence, the music is a little bit more intricate, has some more complications harmonically and also in how the parts interact. And I'm an instrumentalist, and so I kind of approach it a little bit. I mean, I've done some singing and all that stuff, but the group was aware that that's my background.
Mm-hmm.
And when they saw the middle movements, a lot of what we talked about was like, hey, we need some time. We maybe need some spaces where we can sing together and not have intricate textures or just times to shore up the musical space. And so that's how this, I had this idea already, but they were confirming it for me. And and there was an issue of, vocal production as well. That's part of that. And so anyway, the idea here is that there are group expressions, and then you have the soloist who each person kind of takes their turn saying like, oh, there's these things that I'm not really excited about. And then the group affirms. And then the next person goes and they affirm, and the next person goes.
Very cool. Very cool. So is there anything in this first movement you want to touch on?
No, it's probably best to just hear this one. This is the one with the most, like I said, adult language.
Yeah.
But it's one, they're really doing this dramatically so well that it kind of feels like it naturally comes out, even though it's kind of present from the beginning. And the refrain of it's the little things that scratch, that bite and claw, and it really comes across like there's, this is lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, let's move on to the second movement. All right. So this one I heard, right? Because you had like a stealth performance kind of this, or not stealth. I don't know what it's called. It's still a world premiere this weekend, but this movement was played at Here Be Monsters.
Yes.
Back in May. So I've heard this one. It's very, very cool.
Thank you.
So let's just talk about the movement in general. What's going on with push?
So the image here was this idea of like being pressured, being pushed, and several of them use the word push, and that feeling of being like nudged to the edge was the thing that I collected in this text. And so when I went to set it, of course, like the incessant repetition of the word push has that meaning. And there's in the context of maybe the rest of the piece, you could maybe draw a connection to the character in the last movement and what the word push means for women physically in their lives, right, over the course of their lives. And so the idea here was that it was this incessant thing, and that they then push it back against it by saying, oh, don't you do it, and repeating that. So there's this kind of like push back musically. And then they hopefully over the movement, embrace it. It becomes the thing that maybe there's some equilibrium, but rather they're taking control of the situation rather than just being nudged to the edge.
Very cool. And if we could just look at measure 2.
Sure.
I just want to you have those X's, right?
Yeah.
And so these signal less pitch material, sung quality, and more like utterances, primal utterances. So let's talk about that. And it's how do you choose which notes get those and which don't?
That's a great question. The original version of this had more of that in it, and I felt like it had the right attitude, but it didn't capture us in the musical space right away. And so we actually got rid of a few and added in more pitch material. The thing about it is when you are in the context of taking in a musical experience and then you hear sounds that are not generally associated with that, right? It can really break the spell in a way. It can enhance it, certainly, if it's done right. And so what I tried to do here was set it. So in this case, it's the third one in each sort of phrase that where they sing, and then the last one just can't be in the musical space, but has to like have just that raw expression.
Have you gone to any of the rehearsals for this?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is it hard for professional singers to like not sing beautifully, or is that something that just kind of came naturally to them?
No, I mean, I think I can't speak for all of them, of course, but my experience is that they are used to using their voice as an expressive tool, and all of them have a lot of things that they do. You and I know Paige very well, and she's got all of this wide-ranging experience from early music to new music. Laura is all over the place in town doing all these great gigs and everything. And Adrian runs a choir, and I mean, they're just doing all of this stuff all the time. And so it was really impressive to me to see. Well, one, the level of musicianship is incredible. I remember not this past rehearsal, but the previous one, they were reading the first movement, and I was just like blown away that they can do the things that they do with pitch, with rhythm, while thinking about text. But then they're also aware of like the drama of it too. And obviously, they're all professionals. So, but it's, every time I rehearse with them, I'm like, man, they're just incredible people who can do a lot of things. And it's a gift that they're focusing their time and their minds and what they can do with their bodies to, make certainly this piece that I put some time into, but any music that we get to listen to from them.
So one thing I noticed, so we're on measure, so from 66 to 67. So this was interesting because here at the end of the second movement, right, we're just a few measures from the end of the second movement. We have our first dynamic marking, right? What was the thought behind that? Is that super important? Why were there no dynamic markings before?
So in this movement, I wanted this has a little bit, since it's so incessant and it has kind of a beat to it. You know what I mean? Because you heard it. It felt a little bit more, sort of in the like pop space. And I thought of it, in that context, but also in the sort of, I mean, we're used to looking at music now that has dynamics and articulations all over the place. It's
just that's what I'm used to seeing.
Littered with the stuff. Yeah. Right.
And yours is very sparse with that.
Well, yeah. And in this case specifically, I wanted the text to kind of give them the direction. And also, like, they're so seasoned that they're going to make something out of it. Right. And so in this case, I was trying to not give too much so that they could put themselves into it. Right. In a sense, like I skipped ahead. This has a little bit of a pop vibe. So in a sense, like dynamics are treated more with texture in that world, in part because of the delivery mechanism, but also in the classical world, right? We're used to this, but long time ago, right? There wasn't that much written in the
like
music.
Bach never did it,
right? And that also is like before the time of metronomes, right? Like those markings weren't just about speed; they were about character, and they were about how the music was delivered. And so, I'm not advocating that anybody go back to that necessarily, but rather there are musical contexts in which that approach, I think, can be really fruitful. And when you know the performers, like I know them, it felt like the right time to give a little bit more free rein.
Do you ever worry about, someone else performing it that you don't know?
Absolutely not.
No.
One of the most exciting thing to me about writing music is when I hand this to someone else or a group of people, they have an entire lifetime of musical experience and they like breathe life into this thing through that lens. I'm going to hear things that I could never have thought of. And I'm going to see, I mean, like when you're a student, you're learning how to make these, how to communicate with players or whoever. But I've always enjoyed this, that they're going to do things that make sense to them. And I write in a generally pretty traditional way. And that's part of my approach is that I want them to look at this material and it looks familiar so that they can make music immediately. Now, that said, there are some challenges in it, especially rhythmically or maybe some kind of harmonic challenges. But the fact that like this idea is communicated on paper, goes to another human being or human beings, and then through their life and their abilities comes this product is like, it's like magic, right? And so like I love that so much when I hear things in my music that like I didn't necessarily know were there.
Yeah. So and let's talk about this too, because here it goes from 2/4 to 4/4. So later on in other movements, you go from 2/4 to 3/4.
Sure.
Which like I can picture that in my head. What does it sound like when you go from 2/4 to 4/4? And what was kind of the thinking behind that?
You're probably not going to notice.
Okay.
Yeah. So rhythm for me is about how the music you're going from like stress to stress. That's really what or I should say, like emphasis to emphasis.
Okay.
Right. And so the semantics of how it's notated is sometimes irrelevant. So if you're hearing the way it flows here, it could have been written in 2/4 up until that 2/4 time. In fact, this 4/4 could be written in 2/4. But that 2/4 right there just represents like that moment is captured as its own thing. And that's why it has the fermata there, because Adrian's going to hold so very little.
Oh, okay.
And then they move on to push, right? So I could have written it out, I suppose, as a bar of 4/4 with a longer, but I wanted that to be less rational and more, if this feels right, then you move on. Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Is there anything in this movement you wanna talk about?
No, I mean, it is about that incessant repetition of push and what it means and how someone reacts to being pushed.
Yeah.
And then also when you anticipate being pushed and it doesn't happen, there's a moment in here that actually the ensemble decided like, hey, if we get rid of these 2 notes, this moment will be even more impactful. They were absolutely right. So we made that edit.
Which moment is that?
This is, so it's in measure 54. There used to be accompaniment on the downbeat.
With the weight?
Yes, exactly. Okay. There used to be the 4th and 5th voices used to come in there on the downbeat, and they were like, oh, let's take it out. It'll be so much cooler. And they were right.
Very cool.
Yeah, and that's that moment where the Paige is the person who's doing the sort of main line here, and she's like waiting for that moment, ready for it, and it doesn't come. And so then it's like, oh, what is this? Like, how do I contextualize this experience where I expected it, but I didn't get it?
Nice.
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, let's move on to the next one. And this next movement was my favorite movement of the whole thing. I just love this. So I just want to talk a little bit about how this came about, this movement.
So there were a couple of images of like walking a tightrope or having like a tether between, or a connection, some kind of like physical connection, a feeling of tension, and also a feeling of like winding or threading together. And so all of these were all disparate sort of ideas in the discussion, but I wanted to put them together because these are such potent images. And
like the winding together as a positive or a negative?
More that I don't remember exactly what the original, but there was this idea of like being spun together, entwined, and that being a type of connection.
Okay, very cool. In measure 37 of
yes,
this.
okay.
So the glib advice.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about, did they talk about that glib advice?
It was more the idea of having to operate at a certain level and then entertain criticism or I guess criticism is probably the best word.
But not thought out criticism.
Yeah,
right?
From somebody who's
kind of
maybe
like
not
confident but dumb.
I mean, that's a harsh way to put it.
Yeah, confident
maybe.
but not well informed.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, right? It's the I mean, there are plenty of stories of like sort of women having good ideas trampled by like incompetent but very confident men.
Yes.
And this isn't that. It's more the more subtle version of this, where it's like, we've all been guilty of it, I think, where sometimes you say the thing that comes out of in your mind, and the person you're talking to has considered it at 10 levels deeper already.
Okay.
Right. And it was more that was part of the thing that threatens to break this thread, or the single line, or whatever the image is in this moment, is that, I'm working hard to like follow this very narrow path towards success. Mm-hmm. And then it's just nothing for you to criticize this or give me some, hand wave kind of advice or whatever. And so that's, if you think about it, it's sort of like precariously, and that's really the image here, precariously walking a narrowing, thinning line, like a tightrope. and then someone's like, oh, hey, and gives you a shove. It's like well, what do you think I'm doing here? You know, but in the context of a intimate relationship, that can be really damaging and destabilizing, right?
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I thought when I was reading, I thought it was like the first, like men kind of just walking all over them, but it wasn't that. So it was more of like an intimate relationship.
Well, I
Maybe
mean,
not intimate, but close relationship.
Yeah, all of this is about, I think, a sort of intensity of interaction. So, you know, like maybe you're not the greatest of friends with somebody at work or whatever, but you do have to do intense activity with them that requires commitment and effort and all that stuff. So in a way, it is a close relationship, even if, you know, personally or outside of work, you're not close at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there, and this whole piece was informed by all different kinds of relationships. So while instantaneously you could maybe point to a thing and say like, oh, that sounds like it came from an you know, intimate partner or whatever. Obviously, the first movement is about like household things. So that has its identity, right?
Yeah. So then, if we could look at 52. So what is, you know, I think of 3/4. I think of almost like a waltz or something. So what's happening there when we switch to 3/4?
So in this case, really the figure is the identifiable musical unit is what the second voice is singing, right? So there's this pickup that were I not so thin as to be, and then the 3/4 is really just an expansion of the rhythmic unit to encapsulate this part of the phrase that's repeated. So that were I not so thin as to be, mostly, often, completely. Right. It really needed those 3 beats to fit in. I could have expanded it to 4 and put it over 2 measures, but this felt like it really, you know, when you're saying this thing, when you're saying, you know, if I was a different way, then maybe I wouldn't be mostly, often, completely. Like 3 ways of thinking about how you're ultimately, we find out, missed. Right. Yeah. And so you deliver it in this way that's like, it's accelerating. It becomes compressed because you're delivering all of these like emotionally laden, mostly, often, completely. And then the next person affirms it, mostly, often, completely missed. Mm-hmm. And so you also get the delay of what is the experience, right?
Yeah.
And so I was trying to deliver it in a way that fit the instantaneous expression of those 3 words, mostly, often, and completely. But then also because the measure expands and then another voice responds, we get the delayed delivery over a larger unit of what the thing we're listening for happens, right? So I was trying to make a logistical and dramatic consideration at the same time.
What does it sound like? Because you've actually heard this in rehearsals now.
Oh, it sounds great. Yeah, I mean it's really great. Especially
is it jarring a little bit, or
no, not at all.
People don't notice it.
No, and that's one of the things about like you're saying, like if we're in 3/4 and it's like a waltz or some kind of dance, right? If we break the 3/4, it's immediately noticeable.
Yeah,
because all the musical parameters like the harmony, the surface rhythm, the meter, right, melodic shape, and all of that stuff help to confirm that 3/4. And then so when it's broken in that context, it's really jarring. Mm-hmm. You know, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Right. It's obvious, right? In this case, the meter is and this movement specifically is a little bit more sparse, right? There's a lot more single lines or where they take notes from each other and are like nice and tightly together. So it's a little less obvious what the meter is. What we're reacting more to here, I think what most listeners will hear is how the musical gestures fit with the words. And the sort of poetic term is prosody, where musical accent and linguistic accent line up.
Oh, nice.
And so in a sense, we don't think metrically about how we speak, and that's why poetry has like poetic feet and all of that kind of stuff, you know, like the you know, anapestic rhythm or whatever it is, and or what's the Shakespeare iambic pentameter, right? We all learn about that in high school or whatever, but that's why it has that cadence and that feel to it. But we speak much more freely.
Yeah. So is there anything you want to talk about in this movement?
Let's see. I mean, what I tried to do with this one actually was feature Mary's voice a little bit. There are some virtuosic things that kind of leap out of the texture. And as I said, she's the sort of lighter soprano, and she can do this. And so there's a lot of her responding to 2 or 4 other voices, and that makes a really kind of instrumental texture. It sounds, they deliver it like instrumental music rather than like choral music. It's really striking. And then the piece ends with a larger build up to a choral moment, and then several build-ups, and then ends with a single line naturally.
Yeah.
And it begins and ends at the same space in the same pitch.
Yeah. Very cool. Awesome. All right. Well, let's move on to number 4.
Okay.
Right. So I Need to Be Perfect. So let's talk a little bit about this. Like when I think about what women go through, this is like one of those themes that even I think about a lot, right?
Sure.
That women struggle with. So
yeah, and so that was the thing. The image here was glass, right? Because it's transparent, but it's a thing, and it's breakable. And when you break it, you cannot put it back together, right? I mean, sure, of course, you have to melt it
down.
Yeah, but that takes a lot of energy, right? Like, so we could stretch the metaphor forever, I suppose. But this was the way it's set here is I wanted it to be it's marked insistent, and the second movement is marked inexorable.
Okay,
right, and so they have a sort of the push that constant pressure. Or I guess it's periodic pressure. And here it's a constant pressure to be like, I've got it under control, right? There was a lot of that in the text of, needing to be a certain way to keep the equilibrium, as if it's only one person's responsibility, And then, as you said, there's sort of this larger cultural awareness that there's cultural pressure on women to adhere to things. More so than for us, right? And
I feel like this does not apply to men much. Like we're allowed to be kind of screw ups and
for sure. The scrutiny that is directed our way is less, and also seems to have like more boundaries. Yeah, which is deeply unfair and ridiculous.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, I tried to set this in such a way that it had a feeling of even just the beginning. I need to be perfect, consistent. It's the constant hum of existence, right? Mm-hmm. So we get this sense of like, just from those 2 notes, that it's like, here's the thing, and I can't deviate too much. And it's just this stress over and over again, the same emphasis, right? So it has that resonance with push. And then it opens up a little bit, and we get a little bit more colorful harmony. And this is where the singer, it's Adrian at this point, gets to, reflect on what this feeling is.
Mm-hmm. Would you say this has a little bit of a pop feel too?
Yes. Yeah. In that it has a much more regular rhythm. It's the harmonies sound a little bit more familiar to us. So it definitely has that character.
Yeah, very cool. So if we look at 60, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. So from 31 to 32. Mm-hmm. So we go from very quiet to that is loud. So what was going on with this?
So this is like taking the metaphor of the pane of glass, right? And so like this is one of the disturbing things that happens with windows is like birds fly into them, right? Yeah. And so that's what this image is that this bird, confused and disturbed, crashes into me, the singers say, the pane of glass, and is hurt, right? Which is like the absolute worst situation, right? Like that's not what they want to be there for, right? Yeah. And then there's a little bit of like sort of poetic transference of like maybe the bird is the partner, or it represents that or something. Okay. Because the question they ask at that moment is a moment of connection. Is this the thing I'm looking for? This like real connection with a thing? No, it's not. And maybe it's an opportunity to draw attention to this thing that is invisible. And in fact, this is the only movement where they say that word from the title of the piece, invisible.
Okay, so where does that come in, the invisible?
It's just previous. It is in measure 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Okay.
Yeah, so perfect pane of glass through which invisible light can pass.
So was that a big deal to first use that, invisible?
Yeah, and I definitely said it this way, and we actually talked about how to deliver that word specifically in rehearsal.
Yeah, because the other, one voice doesn't sing anything, but the other three say visible, and one person says invisible.
Right, and so they're lining up as sort of a choral trick where, like, one voice says the whole word, but some voices say just a portion of it. But yeah, there's that are we visible, are we invisible sort of poetic.
Yeah, so in rehearsal, how would you go about, like, what did you talk about with that?
So they were singing it very smoothly, like beautiful legato, and I said, okay, maybe like hammer out the rhythm, the triplet rhythm, to emphasize it because it is the name. And they tried it, and then we talked a little bit about like what the vocal production is, how they would have to match the length of every note, going deep into the detail of every element. And so we arrived at a thing that is its emphasis, but it's not taking us out of, it's not so much that it takes us out of the musical moment.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, and this movie, like, I just might not know that much about music, but I see you do this all the time. So at E, so that's 71, 2, 3, you have lots of this where like, one voice will just sing like almost the rhythm, and then the other voice will sing the same, but there'll be like some change. So can you just talk me through that a little bit?
So in this movement specifically, the opening is essentially the same as the second voice here. And in both cases, the note that happens on the downbeat is not part of the chord. And so there's a feeling of tension and release. And so like perfect, consistent, every emphasis is given harmonic context where it feels like there's tension.
Okay.
And so at the beginning, it's in minor. And so we really feel like, oh, what is this? Oh, it's a minor chord. Oh, it's a minor chord. And here it's in major. And so it's like, it's the last note of the scale. So it feels like it really wants to go to the do or the root of the scale, whatever you want to call it. And so that's what you get here. It's sort of a different inflection on the same feeling of tension and release, but the context here is a little bit brighter.
Cool.
Yeah. So it unifies the piece and hopefully keeps that feeling of like tension and rigidity in a sense at the forefront. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah. Well, then let's go on to King Baby.
King Baby.
The last movement we talk about children, right? So let's talk about this movement just kind of overall.
Okay, so His Majesty the Baby is like a psychological concept.
Yeah.
Of not so much a child, but a person who has maybe in some ways not moved on from childhood. So His Majesty the Baby is not about an infant; it's about an adult.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
I totally misread this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I suppose you could, but at the same time, and here he is, His Majesty the Baby. I won't read the rest of it. Come to the concert and listen to that. But at the end, it says, "Oh, not me. I'm not Mama. We're partners. We're colleagues and friends." And so it's like, wait, who is here acting like a baby is really the question. And so that's sort of why it's given this sort of like operatic chorus opening.
Okay.
All right. It's a little bit jokey, right? And then the marking when the music starts in earnest is joking but sincere too. Okay. And so really what I'm getting at here is that we're poking fun at this idea of, again, we're returning to the surface where we can have maybe, after going to the depths of these very intense metaphors and these feelings, that we're coming back to the surface where, we kind of live every day. And so, we've all kind of like in a good natured way given a hard time to people close to us. Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this is, where Katrina is the person who sings the solo line at first. So she says, "I'm joking with you, I tease, but what I want for you is to see that potential that I love deeply that capability to grow. And so even though it's kind of put in a funny context where we're identifying King Baby and suggesting that he not do a thing that he has continued to do, the context here is about compassion and connection and wanting better for King Baby, whoever that is, and yourself, and together as a unit.
Was King Baby, was this mainly like romantic partners that we were talking about? No. So
there's a lot of King Babies.
So tell me about some of the King Babies.
I can't.
Without listing names.
I can't. Well, okay.
Just very, very general. Who tend to be the King Babies?
Everybody. I mean, one of the things, and this is really, I think, the most important point for me specifically, is that, like, I've been the King Baby before.
We've all been the King Baby.
We've all been the King Baby.
Yeah.
Get rid of the diaper. And but seriously, what that means is, like, we don't want to take the people in our lives for granted, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't want to take advantage of people going the extra mile to help us. And I think my big motivation was that, like, I felt like in the past in my life, I haven't been present for some people who I should have been. And, we all have regrets and all of that stuff. But what I'm saying is, like, it's a thing that I think about a lot. And when we experience ourselves, people with whom we have close connections who aren't seemingly coming to the table with enough or whatever, I think it's healthy to sort of also look at yourself and say, like, well, where can I improve too? And so that feeling of wanting to be present for the people in my life and wanting to be a more complete human being, and it's about being, like, intensely present for the people around you, made me want to take this on and ask VAMP if they would trust me to help them tell this story.
Yeah.
And thankfully, good. And it for me, it was a great boon that they did. And, every step of the way, personally and musically, it's been, inspiring, and just listening to them rehearse, listening to them talk and support each other at the beginning and end of rehearsal, and seeing how they are their colleagues, their friends, but they're also an intimate and intricate support system for each other. It's an education, in a sense, for men in general. And I think, for all the things that are really easy for us in the world, what we are not taught, certainly in this country, in the West in general, and probably the rest of the world, right, is that being emotionally vulnerable is not the way we exist.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, a lot of our male relationships aren't characterized by, like, deep sharing of feelings, and that's to our detriment in some cases, in a lot of cases. And it's perceived as almost weak. Which is, like, the exact opposite of what it truly is.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so, to me, it's a being this close to this kind of unit is a learning opportunity, and it's a thing that, hopefully I have the courage to bring to my male friendships and relationships, that, we can support each other and we can be vulnerable and open. And the more we do that with each other, the more we can be that for everyone else in our lives.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I know that the men that are the best at that tend to be people who just got out of, like, the service, especially if they were deployed overseas, because they just they need it, So yeah, but I think we all need it, but they really, really need it. So was this something that came out a lot with the 6-hour conversation, or was this something more that you kind of brought to the
King
table?
Baby,
yeah.
or the
King Baby and
the King Baby for sure.
Yeah. But like you're the concept of opening them up and being more vulnerable.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of the ladies had some or multiple expressions of, like, I wanted a more intense and real connection with a person.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the characterization of King Baby as this sort of like comic character wasn't always the tenor of that thing, but that was a sort of ever present need. And in this case, the beginning of the piece is funny. As I said, through this first real musical moment, it gets to a point of more sincerity. And that was the key to this, is that it's funny, yes, and we can like laugh about King Baby and his diaper and all this stuff. But the real, when the harmony becomes really lush and they're able to say what's real to them, they're saying, I want you to grow. Yeah. So that potential that I love deeply, that capability to grow. And then later, it's just what I want for you to know is that I should expect more than tell me what to do. Basically, it's saying like, hey, please, like, I want to be close to you. I want this to be a partnership. And for whatever reason, at this moment, it's not. And so we'll get back to joking about your diaper or whatever.
Yeah. And like let's see here, measure, what was it, 27, 20, 29. I love how you have the two speakers, like you're feeding the baby with the airplane.
Right, here comes the airplane.
Yeah.
That was we will not spoon feed you. In this case, it's like literal. But that was uttered several times metaphorically about like spoon feeding solutions or do this thing rather than wanting to do the thing or thinking about the context and understanding you need to do the thing. It was like waiting to be told what to do. And that was kind of a constant irritation.
Like what kind of things did they feel?
Just anything, I mean, folding laundry or whatever like that. Okay. Or, so
it kind of goes back to even the first movement in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Because again, this is sort of the superficial thing, but it also came up in terms of like, if we think about that, like, okay, like we share a domicile, right? Like we all need to, okay, like somebody needs a vacuum, somebody needs to clean the litter box. This is the mundane stuff of life, right? But if you're there to do that and you're thinking about it, you don't have to be asked, right? Like when it comes time to like, I mean, family issue, like a family member dies that you're close to, like you need support from that person, right? That same overlay of attention and being present is probably going to be functional there too. And so, in as much as it's kind of fun to joke about the small things, the little things, as it were, the big things are either well supported or not based on that same kind of template, right? Very rarely is someone going to be like, a slob and mess up the house and not take care of things and like, all that stuff, and then show up when it really counts, right?
Yeah,
like that doesn't happen a lot, right?
Yeah.
Or at least it hasn't in their experience, and certainly not in mine. So
yeah. No, so in that measure where the two speakers talk, is how do you do that musically, where you can actually understand what they're saying, or is it kind of meant to be?
Oh, it's in the rest. So everybody sings, we're partners and colleagues and friends, and it's on this harmony that makes us anticipate the next thing.
Oh, okay.
And so in that rest where we're waiting for like the next thing, which we get His Majesty the Tot, right? We hear the two speakers that's like the moment where you can break, because it's set up musically. You can break out of musical sounds and it really works.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And then let's talk about just the very ending.
Okay.
So the optional tag.
Yes. Okay. So this was a phrase that was uttered in the interview, and for obvious reasons, it stuck with me. I mean, I remember writing it down and sort of laughing about it as they were saying it. I won't say who specifically said it, but I do remember. But it combined in with the image of King Baby. And as much as we're making fun of King Baby for his diaper and his helplessness, right? There's also that thing that a baby does with its mother, right?
Yeah.
And they're saying
that's often very painful too. Yeah.
Right. And it's, I'm not mama, so don't treat me like that.
Yeah.
Right. And in a sense, right? Like mama ceases to be mama at a point, right? There's the weaning process and everything. And so like we as men need to take that seriously, I mean, that's another thing like to think about. My mom is like a big inspiration for me. I mean, she's just sharp and will not be denied when she wants to do a thing, and like has always been a great example of like, I want to know a thing, I learn how to do it, and then I do it, and I'm not like a psychologist or whatever, but like that sort of pattern of behavior with women that can be imprinted from how you interact with your mom. I'm always thinking about like what kind of struggles did my mom go through, like raising me and my brother, and with my dad, and her life and all this stuff. And I think there's so much that our parents do for us, and especially our mothers, especially in this culture, right, where women are expected to be so many things all at the same time with no reprieve.
Yes.
And so, thinking about all the women in my life for this piece, I just want to be present for them and make things, my mom's made so many things easy for me that when I am with her or interacting with her, I want to make things easy for her now. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to be king baby.
Yeah. So with this optional tag, is this something that's decided beforehand? We're going to do it so many times, or is this something that's just kind of felt in the moment?
So because it's funny, and because the previous "When Am I Going to Live, King Baby," it kind of sits pretty well, and it can just end there.
Yeah.
I personally wasn't sure exactly how I wanted the piece to end, because like you write, I mean, this is a lot of music, and I wrote it over many months, and so I would want to I just wanted to test it and see, and I wasn't really sure about this, but I had strong enough feeling that I wanted to put it there, and they didn't second guess it at all. They did it, and they were like, yeah, this is right.
Okay.
Yeah, so we will hear it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, and it's just a one time, or can they?
Yeah, it's best one time. If they repeated it, it would take away the power.
Okay, there was another part in this. I don't think we talked about
in push.
Where you can repeat it as many times as you want. Right?
Yes, yeah.
One person.
Because I wanted that in push, that the insistence of it was important. Here, it's a little punchier, where it's like, I told you this before. Last time I'm going to say it.
Yeah. So now that it's done, do you wish you would this wasn't optional?
Oh, I can just delete that. It's fine. They didn't take it as optional, so it's not, right? And this kind of connects with what I was saying. Like, to me, the magic of doing this kind of music where we give it to others and then they realize it is that they make it what they own it, Mm-hmm. And so as far as I'm concerned now, they're interpreting the piece their way, but that is the way. Right. We did this collaboratively. This isn't my music. I mean, I wrote it, but they're realizing, they're making it manifest in the world. And as part of this creation process, I'm learning about the piece and what is the best for it and the best for the collaboration. So, I should ask them like, hey, I wrote optional tag. Did you ever think of it as optional? And see what they have to say, because I can delete that.
Okay, because the next person that does this, will they see the VAMP recording?
Probably in this day and age, that's the way it's going to be.
It'll be on YouTube or something.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And so they may have other. I think at this point, when I was writing the text for this, I wasn't really sure, what kind of performance venues this might come up in and this and that. And then I wrote the text for the first movement and was like, okay, well, everything goes now because we're using all that, the curse words and everything. And so, this is already sort of in place by that time. But hearing it, it's exactly right for the piece.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us. I can't wait to hear it. And it's going to be great. So Saturday, 7:30 at KMFA, right?
Yes.
And they can buy tickets. I'll put it down below, but it's where would they find tickets?
VAMPvocals.com.
VAMPvocals.com. And then also Sunday at like 3:30?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. 3:30. Same location.
Yes.
So do you think there'll be more performance? Will they include this in their repertoire? Or?
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah.
I think that's the idea. Obviously, they did one movement at Here Be Monsters. So whatever performance opportunities come up where something like this would be appropriate, then in a sense, it's up to them if they want to extract a movement and use it. That would be great.
Did they have a favorite movement? Do you feel like the group as a whole?
That's actually a good question. I mean, we talked a little bit about it, but I should ask. I don't know.
Or do you have a favorite movement?
Oof. No, I don't think I have a favorite. Well, I'll find out this weekend.
Yeah.
But the piece kind of works. It really depends on your mood, I guess. It's like, oh, what's your favorite movie? Well, it depends on the day. Right?
Yeah. It's cool. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.